afternoon, welcome to the programme. Later news from your area. But first, the Queen Mother is now lying in state in Westminster Hall in a full ceremonial funeral procession, the like of which has not been seen for nearly 40 years. Her coffin was pulled on a horse-drawn gun carriage in brilliant spring sunshine through central London. Prince Charles and Princes William and Harry, along with other senior royals, walked sombrely behind the coffin, which was draped in the Queen Mother's own personal standard and topped with her crown and a wreath of white roses. Watched by thousands of well-wishers who lined the roads, 1,600 service men and women escorted her coffin to Westminster from St James's Palace. Bill Neely reports.
It was to be a massive pageant full of pomp, but it began with a simple act. Borne by 8 soldiers of the Royal Irish Guards, the Queen Mother's coffin left the Queen's Chapel at St James's Palace, where her body has lain for days. It was draped in her personal standard, topped with a single wreath and surmounted by the crown she wore at the coronation of her husband, King George VI, 65 years ago. Behind, sombre and ready for a march that would not be easy for them, Princes Harry and William. It moved off to the salvos of gunners firing a royal salute, the first of 28, one for every minute of the march. Down the Mall, the procession led by the Duke of Edinburgh, himself 80 years old, and in front to Princess Anne, who had asked the Queen Mother if she might walk with the men at her funeral. 1,600 soldiers, sailors and airmen followed, this the biggest royal procession in 40 years. "50 years ago, this gun carriage carried the coffin of the Queen Mother's husband, King George VI. Just 5 years ago, Princes Harry and William had followed their mother's coffin along the same route. They bore this march well. By now, the procession was almost half a mile long as the coffin passed under Horse Guards Arch, where for almost 80 years the Queen Mother would stand to watch trooping the colour. The spring sunshine was glorious, the silence of the crowds profound as the cortege neared the cenotaph, the memorial to the dead of 2 world wars and others since. This was a poignant moment. Here, every year, the Queen Mother paid homage to the war dead, including her own brother Fergus, killed in 1915. And here, she made one of her final public appearances 5 months ago. Past Downing Street, astonishingly, the Queen Mother knew 20 prime ministers. She was also the last Empress of India, her crown encrusted with an Indian diamond, the most famous in the world. Beside it, the wreath. In loving memory, the card reads, Lilibet, the pet name the Queen used with her mother. Towards Westminster, the crowds swelled now by thousands of tourists, but filled by the tens of thousands for whom she was simply the Queen Mum. The procession had taken exactly 29 minutes, bang on time. She had helped to plan it, and it had been to the second exactly as she would have wanted it. Bill Neely, ITV News.
Well, live now to our royal correspondent at Buckingham Palace. Tom, the procession, all we expected and more.
Yes, Dermot, that's right. But I suppose, Bill was just talking at the end of his report there about how carefully planned this was, how the Queen Mother oversaw all of those preparations. It was exactly what we expected, down to the last sort of letter, and yet all of talk that all the sort of predictions we've made this week, all the things that we've talked about, doesn't actually quite prepare you when you watch it for how moving it is. There is something about seeing it finally. We saw the dress rehearsal yesterday, but seeing it today was very moving, and I suppose a lot of people's eyes will have been drawn to the family marching behind. This was a public event. In a way, it was for the public to say thank you and pay their respects to the Queen Mother. There was a great deal of history in it, but at the same time it was a private family event as well. And we saw the grandchildren in particular walking behind there. We saw the wreath with that card saying Lilibet. Prince Charles in particular, I think this has been a very, very difficult day for him. We saw his moving tribute earlier in the week. We know that he essentially retreated to Highgrove. We know from his brothers and sister that he really didn't want to talk about it. It has been an awful week for him, and I think a very difficult day for the whole family.
Yes, Tom, the sense of duty seemed to hang especially heavily when we saw those pictures over the younger royals.
I think particularly with Princes William and Harry, I mean, perhaps one's taking this too far, but it did seem to me that the sort of pain of it all was etched particularly on Prince Harry's face. We've talked before, it's a very, very difficult day for them. Everything we know about that experience 5 years ago was that they found it really appalling and terrible, and I think they did extremely well to get through today.
Thank you, Tom. Well, the Queen travelled separately to Westminster Hall, where she met her mother's coffin as it arrived at the Great North Door. After it was laid on a raised platform, there was a simple moving service to remember the Queen Mother, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury. After the Queen left the service, she was greeted by warm applause from the watching crowds. Here's Paul Davis.
Leaving Windsor for the first time since the death of her mother 6 days ago, the Queen made the short journey back to the capital and Westminster Hall. By the time she arrived at the hall, Prince Philip had taken his place in the procession, and the Queen was accompanied by female members of the royal family. As the coffin was slowly carried into Westminster Hall, those closest to the Queen Mother, the entire royal family, as well as members of both Houses of Parliament, were present to share this solemn moment and to join in the prayers led by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
O Lord, our Heavenly Father, Almighty and everlasting God, we remember before Thee our sister, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. We give thanks for her example of faithful duty and unwearied service, and for the loyalty and love which she inspired. Hear, Lord, the prayers of Thy people, and grant that we who confess Thy name on earth, with her may be made perfect in the kingdom of Thy Son, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Officers of the Household Cavalry then slowly marched across the hall, taking up positions at each corner of the coffin, beginning the vigil that will continue until next week's funeral. It was a short but poignant service, and 15 minutes after the coffin had arrived, the Queen led her family back out of the hall. On her journey back to Buckingham Palace, she was warmly applauded by the crowds that had gathered to share this moment and their sympathy. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Well, to Nicholas Owen now, outside Westminster Hall. So, Nick, was that applause a bit of a surprise?
Well, it was a bit. We remember perhaps that there was a bit of applause around at the time of Princess Diana's funeral. Times have changed, haven't they? Back in the 1930s and in the 1950s at royal funerals, respectful silence all round was the order of the day. But now I think it is a very dignified in its way and a very nice way of showing all the support and sympathy that undoubtedly everybody feels at the moment for the Queen.
And Nick, when will the public be able to get into Westminster Hall and pay their respects to the Queen Mother?
From 2 o'clock this afternoon, that should be possible for people. The hall will remain open to visitors who are asked to dress in dark colours, nothing bright. Thousands of them are expected, and as I say, from 2 o'clock this afternoon until 6 o'clock this evening, and then over the next 3 days from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening, culminating, as we know, in the vigil on Monday evening by the Queen Mother's grandsons. They said they would do that, an echo of what happened in 1936 when the sons of King George V, they stood vigil by his coffin.
Nicholas Owen, thank you. Well, some of those thousands of people who lined the route queued overnight to get the best position from which to watch today's procession and to pay their last respects. It was an event like no other, many said, and they just wanted to say goodbye to the Queen Mother. Our correspondent Nina Nana has been talking to some of them.
6 o'clock this morning and the barriers are being erected in anticipation of the many visitors to the capital today. Hundreds of police officers are on duty, amongst their tasks to close the many roads around the route of the procession to traffic. Security for such a huge event is of course paramount. Nothing is being left to chance. Many spectators had also left nothing to chance. It had been a cold night, but these people had been in place for hours, setting up temporary home overnight in what they considered would be the best vantage point for the occasion.
Pamela, what time did we get here? 11 o'clock? Yeah, about 10, about 11 o'clock, something like that. And it's freezing.
Sandra Lister came down from Norfolk yesterday and brought her 11-year-old grandson.
We were hoping to be here for her 102nd birthday because we were at her last one, but unfortunately, you know.
So for Ashley, it would now be a sad occasion.
It's just an upsetting time, so you can't really be excited.
As it started to get lighter, the crowds got heavier. It was a family occasion. Every generation had its own memories. What did you think about the Queen Mother?
She was very kind because I shared a birthday with her. And I gave her a cake on one of her birthdays. And Nathaniel once gave her one of his biscuits.
With hours to go until the procession, the streets are already lined by thousands of people. The crowds are predominantly British, but there are those who've travelled great distances to be here, from the Commonwealth and beyond.
She supported all our troops in the war. Everybody knew about the Queen Mother and George VI. And I saw her when I was 4 in 1939, when they came to Canada just before the war.
I just wanted to say goodbye and rest in peace.
You know, when you like people, you don't expect them to die, you don't want them to die. And she became like a grandma to me.
There was a lot of waiting involved this morning, but people had come prepared and no one seemed to mind.
It's an amazing part of history. I mean, she meant so much to the country and probably to the world, and we're just learning about her, so it's good for us, a good experience.
And just a short time ago, the event that the thousands had come to see, an historical and moving occasion that so many were determined that they would be a part of. Nina Nana, ITV News.
Well, let's go to Andrea Catherwood now, who's been with the crowds outside Clarence House, the Queen Mother's London home. Andrea, it's been called history in the making. How did the people there feel to be part of it?
Well, yes, I've been with the thousands of people who were on the Mall today, just outside Queen's Chapel, where, of course, the funeral procession started. And as the cortege came into view, thousands of people there fell completely silent. I think they were awed by the spectacle of the event. There was an atmosphere of dignity, an atmosphere of solemnity. And I think people were deeply moved when they saw the Queen Mother's coffin draped in her personal standard on top of the gun carriage. A lot of people here had brought children with them. Some will be too young to even remember this day. But there was a feeling that people here wanted to participate in a unique historical event, as well, of course, as saying their own personal goodbyes to a much-loved lady.
And now it's over. What have they been saying about the procession and the Queen Mother?
Well, of course, there is a great outpouring of warmth and affection for the Queen Mother. I'm here at Clarence House, where, of course, she lived for 50 years, and this really has become the focal point of many floral tributes, many messages. You can see the crowd behind me here reading some of those messages. What most people are really saying is just thank you to the Queen Mother. Thank you for her years of devotion and service to the country.
Andrea, thanks a lot. Well, millions of people, both here and around the world, watched today's events unfold on television. For some who knew and served the Queen Mother, it was particularly poignant. Martin Geisler met some of them.
A group of old soldiers gathered with friends in the town of Forfar near Dundee today to watch the funeral procession. They had served with the Black Watch. The Queen Mother was the regiment's colonel-in-chief.
She had a great affection for the Highlanders, her Highlanders, and of course we the jocks in return had a great affection for her.
Well, all the time I met her, she never put her foot wrong, and she made you at home.
Well, it's a big loss to the Black Watch, and a big loss all over the world.
The Queen Mother knew this part of the world. She grew up here. These pictures show her opening the Forfar Flower Show as Duchess of York in 1934. She kept those links with the area over the years. Just 5 miles away, the Bowes-Lyon family seat. Glamis Castle open to visitors today, but estate staff who could be spared were allowed off duty to watch the procession in private. They were joined by former castle workers, among them Betty Anderson, who served the Queen Mother at table on her many visits here since the 1960s.
Well, she just came in and greeted you as if she'd known you for such a long time. But then she was a lady like that. She didn't seem to forget the people that was around her.
In one tribute this week, it was said that Britain will be the poorer for the Queen Mother's passing, but the richer for her memory. Nowhere will those sentiments be more keenly felt than here in Scotland, the place she called home. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Glamis.
Well, now today's other major news story, and Israel has remained defiant in the face of President Bush's demands for peace, with fierce fighting continuing on the West Bank. In an exclusive ITV interview, President Bush said that for the fighting to end, Israel must pull out of the occupied territories and the Palestinians must live up to the peace agreement. Here's our defence correspondent, Kevin Dunn.
Overnight, gun battles raged across the West Bank as Israel defied President Bush's call to withdraw. Israel justified its military offensive by releasing pictures of Palestinian gunmen. They also showed what they said were hundreds of weapons seized from Palestinians in Bethlehem. In Ramallah, where Israeli tanks continue to trap Yasser Arafat, an American mediator was allowed by the Israelis to meet the Palestinian leader, but they did not allow the press to witness it. This was their response to the cameras. In an exclusive interview with ITV's Trevor McDonald, President Bush explained why he had undertaken his initiative.
I'm calling on the Palestinians to live up to the agreement, and I'm calling on the Israelis to pull out of the occupied territories, of places or cities they've occupied recently, trying to set up a situation where we can achieve peace. That's what I want. I want peace.
The Middle East will now top the agenda for the President's weekend summit with the Prime Minister.
President Bush is right to try and engage the parties with that process. We need then to get into what are agreed plans that have already been worked out so that we can eventually come into a proper political process and resolve this issue, which is a recognition by the Arab world of the right of Israel to exist secure within its own borders, and the recognition that there will be, out of the process of negotiation, a viable Palestinian state.
But many observers fear Israel will try to consolidate its stranglehold on the West Bank before Colin Powell's mediation attempt. Kevin Dunn, ITV News.
And you can see Trevor McDonald's interview with President Bush in full in a special edition of the Tonight programme at 10:30 tonight on ITV1. Here there's been more disruption on the railways as long-suffering rail passengers face yet more chaos, with 2 strikes taking place today. Services across the north of England are being crippled as a result. RMT members on Arriva Trains Northern are staging a 48-hour strike over pay, and First North Western trains have also been hit by a driver strike over the sacking of a driver. Well, I'll be back shortly with more on the Queen Mother's funeral procession, but first it's over to newsrooms across the country for news from your own areas.
Hello and welcome to the Lunchtime News from Granada. First, the headlines. More chaos on the region's rail network as 2 strikes bring the system to a grinding halt. Waiting for the all-clear, 150 residents in Salford are forced to leave their homes after fire destroys a nearby factory. And they're off. Jockeys for this weekend's Grand National pay a visit to Alderhay. Good afternoon. Much of the North West rail network is at a standstill today because of strikes at 2 of the region's main train operators. The action at Arriva Northern and First North Western began in the early hours of this morning. It's meant severe disruption for thousands of rush hour commuters. Stephen Chapman has this report.
Rush hour and deserted stations are an all too familiar sight at the moment. Today, RMT members on Arriva Trains Northern staged their latest 48-hour strike after Arriva accused the union of demanding unreasonable pay increases. RMT, however, said the company was treating their workforce with contempt. Hundreds of drivers at First North Western trains have also walked out today in a separate dispute. The ASLEF union has accused the company of being vindictive and draconian over the treatment of a number of their staff, including one driver who was sacked after going through 2 consecutive red lights and speeding. First North Western say they have to take safety matters seriously, and both parties are due to continue talks to avert a further strike on Monday. Replacement bus services have been organised, but passengers aren't impressed.
I know that it's about safety issues. I don't support it if drivers were being careless.
Didn't get much help on the bus on the way up, you know, trying to get on with bags and pushchairs. It's just not very good at all, is it?
And with Manchester Airport security workers going on strike later this afternoon, a difficult day for travellers is set to get much worse.
Detectives investigating the murder of Jason Griffin in Cheshire have made 2 further arrests. The 33-year-old died from head and chest injuries following an incident at Ellesmere Port in the early hours of Easter Sunday. Police say 2 men aged 25 and 27 are being interviewed. A 23-year-old man was questioned and released on bail earlier in the week. It's hoped that 150 people who had to leave their homes in Greater Manchester following a fire last night will be allowed back this afternoon. The area around a disused workshop at Pendlebury in Salford has been evacuated because of fears that gas tanks might explode. Philip Bennell has the latest.
The fire broke out in the yard at 7 o'clock last night. 25 firefighters were tackling the blaze when it was established that highly explosive acetylene bottles could be stored within the building. Houses in nearby streets were immediately evacuated by the police.
I was pretty upset because I've got a 3-week-old daughter and we had to evacuate pretty quickly, so we're just getting loads of stuff together and stuff, and nobody knew what was happening and what time we could come back or how long it'd be, so.
The area will be cordoned off until at least 4 p.m. when an inspection will take place.
If it's safe, the cylinders will be removed and that local residents will be allowed back in. If the cylinders are still still has some warmth, there'll be probably another 6 to 12 hours. That's the officer in charge's decision. He'll do a full risk assessment, but public safety is paramount.
The cause of the fire is unknown. Investigations will begin when the all clear is given.
Greater Manchester Police are preparing to mount a major operation for tomorrow's Oldham-Stoke football match at Boundary Park. The fixture last year was marred by hooliganism, some of it race-related. Hundreds of officers will be on the streets and some of the town's railway stations will also be closed. Ian Ritson has the details.
As thousands of supporters arrived for the game last year, a large number of people headed straight for the Asian community of Westwood. Police say right-wing groups infiltrated fans who rampaged through the streets, fighting and smashing windows, as well as chanting racial abuse. Tomorrow, hundreds of police officers will take to the streets in one of the biggest operations of its kind.
We can't afford to have hooligan elements stirring up tensions in the town. Things are sensitive. People know about the riots in Oldham. We don't want any repetition of that, so it's important that they help us. Anybody who engages in any criminal behaviour, racist chanting or racist behaviour, we will be taking a very robust stance in arresting both pre-match, during the match and after the match.
The game is all ticket. Police say anyone without will be turned away from Oldham.
A decision on controversial plans for the future of Liverpool's Pier Head has been deferred. The Mersey Docks and Harbour Company wants to build a car marshalling area on the site near the Liver buildings. It says it's essential for the expansion of ferry services, but protesters say the plans would mean the loss of an important public space. The City Council has delayed a decision to allow a site visit to take place. Plans for a Europe-wide Mardi Gras festival in Manchester next year are being discussed today. The board of Euro Pride are in the city planning the event for 2003. Manchester's Mardi Gras, traditionally a gay pride event, is famous for drawing huge crowds and raising cash for charity. A search for women who worked in top-secret munitions factories in Liverpool during the Second World War has been launched. They're being asked for their memories about their experiences for a new project on Merseyside. Jasmine Syed has the story.
They were known as Liverpool's Forgotten Army. Thousands of munitions workers, most of them women, who spent the war working at secret factories, producing guns and shells for Britain's frontline services. They would have undoubtedly been targets for Hitler's Luftwaffe had he known of their existence. Lily Spinks, who's 85, inspected rifles in a munitions factory in Fazakerley from 1943 to 1945.
First it was on inspection, and then we got transferred up to the Z block, as he called it, and we used to repair the rifles, the faults that were found after being on the range.
The Museum of Liverpool Life wants to trace as many women munitions workers as possible for a new project it's starting up.
We're launching a project which we've called 800 Lives, which will lead up to Liverpool's 800th anniversary in 2007. And the idea is to record and document 800 people to represent the diversity of living memory really over the past 60 years.
Women who would like to take part in the project should contact the Museum of Liverpool Life.
Now it's Ladies' Day at Aintree today, but before this afternoon's racing gets underway, some of the Grand National's top jockeys have paid a visit to a children's hospital, and the excited youngsters were eager to meet them ahead of tomorrow's big race. Andy Bonner reports.
Work's already underway to build the UK's first integrated children's cancer unit at Alder Hey, and today some top jockeys lent their support in helping the hospital over the final hurdles to raise £10 million.
Tomorrow's a big race, and they might have a little bit of an interest if they've seen a few of us jockeys who are going to ride in it. So it's good for them, and it's good for us to come and see. You know what? We're obviously pretty privileged to be pretty healthy.
People say that jump jockeys are brave, but you know we're not anywhere near as brave as these lads and girls. You know they've got a real uphill fight, and they show great courage and resolution.
Just wondering why they're all this like laughing and stuff outside. Suddenly I noticed he was someone famous because, yeah, and I've been told, I remember the age he was on tomorrow, so yeah, it's been quite exciting really.
Tony McCoy made history on Tuesday by partnering his 270th winner of the season. Aaron Holmes was one of many youngsters to ask him for a tip for tomorrow's big race.
They'll probably watch the Grand Nationals. A lot of people will, but hopefully, you know, as I say, hopefully it'll just help them. If anything, if it just cheers them up a little bit and just makes them a little bit happier, even for the day, it's worth it. You know what I mean?
I think it's been really good for the kids. It's been, you know, he was smiling. I think he was a bit bewildered, but it was really good.
The jockeys also signed some silks to be auctioned off in aid of the new unit.
Football, and Manchester United's Roy Keane is awaiting the outcome of a scan on his knee which could determine whether he'll be fit for this summer's World Cup. The Republic of Ireland skipper was carried off during United's Champions League quarter-final on Tuesday. He was first diagnosed with a hamstring injury and a 4-week absence was ordered, but there are now fears that he may have suffered ligament damage. One of the greatest footballers England has ever produced, Preston's Sir Tom Finney, is celebrating his 80th birthday today. Sir Tom made more than 430 appearances for North End. He was also a cornerstone of the national side, playing on both wings and at centre-forward. Never booked or sent off, he was knighted in 1988. He was once described by Sir Matt Busby as the outstanding player of his generation. And we'll be talking to Sir Tom on Granada Reports from 6 this evening. Just before we go, news of another chance to see Granada's tribute to the former MP for Wythenshawe, Alf Morris. With the details of Sunday's programme, here's Stephen Roberts.
On Sunday, Granada pays tribute to one of the Northwest's greatest campaigners. Through the maelstrom of politics in the 60s and 70s shines the achievements of Alf Morris. His 1969 Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Bill was the first major law on disability. It's since been copied throughout the world. Alf Morris first stood for Parliament 50 years ago in Liverpool. Now in the Lords, he's still fighting.
They'll not know until 2003.
Alf Morris, 50 years, still fighting, Sunday at 12:30 on Granada.
And that's all from the newsroom so far today. Our next bulletin is at 3:10, but for now it's back to the ITV Lunchtime News and Dermot Murnahan.
Hello again. You're watching the ITV Lunchtime News. We've been on the air since 12:30 on a day dominated by the funeral procession of the Queen Mother's coffin. It's now 1 o'clock and the main news is that the Queen Mother is now lying in state in Westminster Hall. In a full ceremonial funeral procession, her coffin was pulled on a horse-drawn gun carriage through central London. Afterwards, the Queen was greeted by warm applause from the thousands of well-wishers who'd lined the route. Here's Adrian Britton.
From the chapel at St James's Palace into the spring sunshine, the Queen Mother's coffin was carried by 8 members of the Irish Guards. It was placed onto the gun carriage which 50 years ago had carried the body of her husband, King George VI, her beloved Bertie. Behind, standing in silence, those closest to the Queen Mother, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The coffin draped in the Queen Mother's personal standard and bearing her crown. A 28-minute procession past the crowds of people who lined the Mall, and every minute of the ceremonial walk saluted with a gun fired from London's Green Hill. Once again, the young princes, William and Harry, were walking in ceremony behind a coffin as they had at their mother's funeral. Prince Charles said he had dreaded this moment. 20 months ago, Horse Guards Parade was crowded with well-wishers celebrating the Queen Mother's 100th birthday. Now they were together, sharing this solemn moment, no matter what the age, no matter what the reason.
You know, when you like people, you don't expect them to die, you don't want them to die. And she became like a grandma to me.
She was very kind, because I shared a birthday with her.
And then into the austerity of Westminster Hall, where the Queen Mother's coffin will lie in state until her funeral on Tuesday. Both Houses of Parliament and all parties represented at the final stage of today's ceremony. And on such a solemn day, a surprise moment of cheer from the crowds as the Queen and Prince Philip returned to Buckingham Palace. Support for a monarchy in grief. Adrian Britton, ITV News.
And we'll have more on the Queen Mother's funeral procession in the ITV Evening News at 6:30. But for now, from all the team here with the ITV Lunchtime News, goodbye.
Hello, good afternoon. It's dry, settled conditions for the most part over the next few days. Having said that, we've some cloud around, mainly for northeastern fringes there and down in the southwestern corner of England. But for most of us, it's plenty of dry, sunny weather and temperatures coming in at around about 12 for Belfast and Glasgow, more like 16, 17 for Cardiff as well as London. All the while, though, that easterly breeze making it feel even chillier. As far as tonight goes, dry, some clear slots, more in the way of cloud for central and eastern Scotland as well as northeastern England there, and a chilly old night in the offing, it has to be said. Temperatures down as low as 3 or 4 degrees with some touches of ground frost, and this wind strengthening for southern counties, a cold easterly wind. So that's the way we expect tomorrow to go, feeling cool and windy in the south. That's all from me.
In a few minutes here on Granada, Kiddies Fashion and Gilly Brooks in the kitchen on Lunchtime Live with Eamon O'Neill. That's after the regional weather.
Granada weather.
Good afternoon. The weather's very settled across most parts of the region at the moment. It was certainly a misty and foggy start, but most of that cloud and mist is in the process of clearing. So I think this afternoon, basically unbroken sunshine, very bright and sunny. Temperatures, well, not doing too badly at all. And the sunshine reaching 16 Celsius, which is 61 degrees Fahrenheit, above average for this time of the year. The winds on the brisk side and from the northeast. This evening, dry with further spells of sunshine through tonight. Much like in previous nights, it will start off dry and clear, quickly becoming misty, chance of a few shallow fog patches. And temperatures, well, low enough, especially for South Cumbria and North Lancashire, especially in sheltered places, to produce a touch of ground frost down to 2 Celsius. The winds on the whole little lighter and from the northeast. Tomorrow it's more of the same, a misty and foggy start, then brightening up with some sunshine. Here's the summary.
So what do you think?
I think I'm in love with this floor.
This textured glueless laminate flooring is half price.